hello out there. Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Annette Richmond. This is the Smarter Careers and Business Moves LinkedIn Live and Podcast. And I am so excited to have Shannon with me today. Now, Shannon, I met you recently at an event and we've gotten to know each other a little bit on LinkedIn. And this is such a, popular and also sort of essential topic for so many people that I'm so excited to have you on my show today. And for anyone who doesn't know you, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me on, Annette. It's been really nice to get to know you a little bit over the past several weeks since we've met. It's moved fast, right? Sometimes you just connect with someone, and that's what happened here. And for all of you that don't know me out there, my name is Shannon Daniels. I'm a public speaking, communication, and confidence coach. And what that really means is I help people find their voice and share their message with the world and do that confidently.
Confidence is such a big thing. And, we were talking a little bit about that backstage before we went live. And I'd really like to begin talking about that because, as we know, I'm sure you know anyway, that fear of public speaking is the number one fear that
Yes.
people have. And there's that sort of morbid saying that people would rather be in the casket at a funeral than giving the eulogy because they're so nervous about it. And, I know people who have had training, like gone to Toastmasters, and they're still really nervous when they go and get on a stage ready to speak to an audience. So can we start there and you give us some tips on how to sort of quell those fears and maybe be more ready?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. People do fear it more than death itself. The number is about 73% of the population is afraid of public speaking. And there's actually a term for it. It's glossophobia. And it's not really being fearful of public speaking itself, it's fear of the judgment that if you mess up or all eyes are on you, people will be judging you up there for the way you're presenting yourself.
Mhm.
And it can be overcome. I've worked with a lot of people to do that. And for me, I personally have 3 Ps that I work with people on for overcoming public speaking fear and anxiety. The first of those Ps is preparation. A lot of people go into a speech or a presentation having just jotted down some notes or created a PowerPoint slide or just written something out real quick, not really digging in and doing the right amount of preparation to get ready for it. And that leads to increased anxiety. The second P that I have here is practice. Again, a lot of times people will sit in front of their computer, they'll thumb through the PowerPoint slides or read through their notes, and they won't prepare or practice by saying it out loud. You need to practice by saying it out loud. And the reason for that is because the way we think and the way we read and the way we write is much different than the way we speak. So a lot of times when we're going through that presentation in our head and we think we've got it down, when it comes time for it to come out of here, there's a disconnect and it's falling flat and you're stumbling over your words. So practice it out loud and practice it often. And the third P is the power up, which is all these confidence boosting techniques like power posing and breathing, meditation, even down to the way you eat. And a big one that I like to recommend for most people is avoid caffeine. When we
Oh.
get anxious, we go into fight or flight mode, right? Our
Mhm.
body gets flooded with cortisol and all these stress hormones, and we start to get shaky and nervous, and our heart starts racing, and it's like, well, if you think about it, caffeine has a similar effect on our body. And so if we pour caffeine on top of that, it's like adding fuel to the fire. So instead of putting it out, we're just making it get bigger there. So it can lead to higher anxiety type symptoms when it's not
Mhm.
really necessarily anxiety.
Oh, so we think it's anxiety, but it's really that caffeine, caffeine jitters or something. So, I will say that I do practice a presentation. Now, I don't stand in front of the room but I will stand in front of my computer and go through use my remote to go through the slides so that I am comfortable, speaking. And, you know, one of the things that we talked about, and I'm wondering if this might be even over preparation, that we were talking about before we went live, the idea of having notes. I told you I've had people on my show. I used to give questions, and people would read. They'd be reading the answer, even though they knew it cold. They knew it, and I have had other. I watched other speaker coaches like you say that it's okay to have like jot down some things on note cards. So give me your take on that whole over preparing too much, note cards, and how we should sort of work with that.
Yeah, I actually have a client I'm working with right now that is an over preparer, meaning he just practices and practices and practices and overdoes notes to the point that it actually induces anxiety in another way. So there is a fine line and a balance. You don't want to drive yourself, out of your mind trying to get prepared for this thing. You want to prepare enough so that you feel comfortable. But notes are absolutely okay. What you should avoid is writing out your presentation word for word and trying to either memorize it
Mhm.
or read it out word for word. That actually increases your anxiety. And the reason why it increases your anxiety is because you're worried about getting every single word just so. And if you're memorizing it and you lose your place, you're going to freak out, you're going to pause, and your anxiety is going to start going through the roof, and there'll be a mini meltdown right there on stage when you least want it. And it's hard to get yourself back on track. The
You
same thing
know,
happens.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the same thing happens if you're reading it. Like a lot of people, it's a crutch. I need to have it up there. That way, if I forget, I can read it. And again, if you lose your place and it's hard to get back, then your anxiety goes through the roof. The best thing to do is create what I call a speech roadmap. And it's kind of like giving directions, right? If you're giving directions to your office, for example, you have certain landmarks that you're going to take people through to get there. You're going to go about 2 blocks, you'll come to a light, you'll see a Dunkin' Donuts on the right, make a right there, go down, I don't know, it's 3 or 4 blocks again, then you'll see the gas station on your left, right? You know those landmarks, and then how you fill in the blanks in between those landmarks may vary each time you give those directions, but the essence is the same. And so that's what you want to do with a speech. Know your major main points and know the in between high level of what you're going to be talking about. Of course, you want to practice it all the way through so you really get to know your material. But then if you don't say every single word exactly the same every time, that's fine. If you forget a line, guess what? It's okay. Just keep moving on. Nobody in the audience knows what you are going to say. You are the only one. So if you missed a line, they don't know. You do.
Yeah. No, I love that you said that because that's what I was thinking that I had learned too, that, nobody knows what I'm when I stand up before and to speak to an audience, they have no idea what I'm going to say. And my slides are very minimal.
Yep.
And I use note cards to make some notes. So if I'm trying to remember to hit a few different things, but I know I think it's crazy how people are so worried. And the thing too, and I say this to people when I'm talking to them about doing video, is that people don't care what you look like. They're not judging you when you get stand in front of them on what you're wearing or your hair, or if you need to lose some weight or whatever. All they care about is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, it's what you're saying and how you're saying it. And at the end of the day, we're humans that want to connect with other humans. And so it's how we connect with each other. It's being authentic and just being who you are. And if you can do that and you can share a message that resonates with your audience, you're going to be winning. That's the most important thing.
No, I love that, and I appreciate you saying what you have been. And I am someone that I'm pretty comfortable in front of an audience speaking. I think it's partly because I've been doing these lives for so long, and I'm used to being live, and I don't even think about it, even though there are people watching, and I don't think about it. But, and I just did it now, I am terrible with ums and ahs and you knows. And I was just watching the recording of a presentation I just did last week. I thought it went pretty well. I still think it went pretty well, but I cringe when I hear myself say that. And you said you have some tips for that.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, the biggest tip is get comfortable with silence. We use those filler words because we're not okay with the pause. And the pause to the speaker feels like an eternity. So if I were to stop here and wait and slow down for emphasis, for you as the audience, that probably didn't feel like a super long period of time. For a nervous speaker, those couple of seconds feel like forever. And so practice getting comfortable with pauses and with silence. And then, second of all, you reach for those filler words when you're trying to fill that space while you're thinking about what to say next. So, if you are practicing and you know what you're going to talk about, you're less likely to be reaching and thinking while you're speaking. So, you're less likely to pull out filler words. Another little hack that I like to teach people is you can take your tongue and stick it just on the roof of your mouth gently and do it in a way that is not visible. So if I do it right now, you don't know that I'm doing it, right? It's just a way to keep myself from speaking while I'm thinking. And so you can hold that up there. And then a final tip is while you're practicing, a good way to get comfortable with those pauses and with that silence is think about when you're reading or writing. A comma is a shorter pause than a period is. When you're speaking, when you're practicing, if you count to one in your head where a comma should be before proceeding, or count to two in your head where a period should be before proceeding, you'll start to get comfortable with those pauses and with that silence, and that will start to drown out some of those ums and uhs and likes and you knows.
Well, that's very interesting because as you were saying that, I was doing it too. And you're right. I mean, as I looked down to look at myself on the screen, and it just looked like I was smiling a bit. And
Mhm.
I think for me also, and I do it more when I'm on a show like this, is I get really excited.
Mhm.
And I'm excited to be chatting with the person I'm chatting with. And I get, we're start talking about a topic and something like, oh wow. And I think that that's part of my problem is that I get so excited and I'm enjoying it that I don't think to be, maybe it's more professional. I'm not sure how you would describe that.
It's not really about professionalism. When I get excited, I tend to talk really fast. So I have to be mindful of that and tell myself, slow down. And that's another reason why public speaking is a skill to be developed, is because you have to be mindful and you have to be thinking about several things at one time, not just what you're talking about. You have to be
Mhm.
thinking about your stage presence and your rate, your pitch, your speed, all of these things, how you're using your body language, your all these verbal and nonverbal delivery aspects that there's long lists that I could go on and on. And so there's a lot of thinking involved. But one of the ways I like to describe it is, have you ever played a sport, Annette?
Not so much. Not no, not so much.
Okay, well, for those people that have played sports, or even if you haven't, you're
Okay.
familiar with it, or maybe you
Mhm.
cook or you bake. When you
Yeah.
first started, there you go. When you first started, you probably weren't the greatest at it, and you had to pay really close attention to the recipes, for example, to make sure you got your timing right and all of the ingredients right and the measurements right. Over time, you started to get more familiar with cooking and the recipes and how to do it, or how to play that sport. When you're first starting out, you have to be very mindful and intentional for how you're doing your motions and your sports, or the steps in your recipe. But as you get more familiar, it just becomes second nature. You become better at soccer. You
Hmm.
become
Hmm.
better at pickleball, since that's popular right now. You
I know.
become better at baking and cooking, and you don't have to think as hard about it. The same thing happens in public speaking. Initially, you need to be really intentional with these things and think about them. And then over time, it just becomes second nature.
Yeah, I was one of those oddballs in high school. I was a cheerleader, so I didn't play sports.
That's a
But
sport.
but as you were talking, I was thinking it's kind of like driving too. When you first learn to drive, you have to watch everything, and now you get in the car, you go where you're going, and you don't even think about it.
Yep. Autopilot.
Yeah, so that gives me hope. That gives me hope for me. And I would like to ask you about ways that people can be better. Obviously, they can work with someone like you or you.
Mhm.
But what about things like Toastmasters? What is there a certain level where Toastmasters is not as advantageous? If you can give me a little rundown, because I'm sure you know about that.
Yeah, Toastmasters is a great organization for helping you to get in front of people and get used to speaking in front of a room. It also helps you heighten your awareness of your ums, your uhs, your timings, all of those things. What Toastmasters doesn't do as much of is get down into the nitty-gritty and work with people one-on-one on your specific fear or the skills that you specifically need to focus on. So for people that want to specifically focus on certain skills or really work on um, their, see, I just said an too. It happens for people that really want to work on their speech writing or their content, for example, or really want to hone in on specific delivery or get ready for something big like a TED talk that I've helped
Mhm.
several people with, or
Mhm.
media training, things like that. Those things aren't going to be covered in Toastmasters, but Toastmasters is a fantastic program for getting out there and for starting to get in front of people and build some confidence for yourself.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and I had another sort of speaker coach that I had on my show a while ago. I've had a couple, and they said the same thing, that it's really great if you are one of those people that's really nervous. It can benefit you tremendously, just because it forces you to get up there and do it over and over again in front of a live audience. But
Mhm.
if you want to work on, for someone like, if for me, if I want to work on my ums and my ahs and my you knows, that I'm better off working one-on-one with someone like you
Yeah,
than to go there. So you mentioned TED Talks, and I was going to ask you about that anyway, because I know that you've done a TEDx. I
yeah.
watched it. It was great.
Oh, thank
So
you.
so can you give me and our audience some tips on, maybe how to prepare, how to even do it in the first place, because people want to do it and we don't know how to even try.
Yeah. The first step is to start researching different TED conferences or TEDx conferences that fit in with A, where you want to be to present, and then B, are centered around a theme that you feel comfortable presenting within. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make when it comes to preparing for and applying to TEDx's is just throwing out a blanket application to all the different TEDx conferences that look interesting to them. And some are much more competitive than others. But
Oh.
what you have to keep in mind is that just like with any audience or any conference that you're applying to, there's generally a theme for the TEDx. And if you just throw out a generic application for a topic that you want to talk about that's not geared towards that particular TEDx conference, then you're not going to get accepted. You have to gear your application and your talk to that theme. And if it doesn't fit within that theme, it's better to find a different one that's either more general or has a theme that your talk would fit within. And then you always want to tailor your application and your talk to fit the theme of the conference.
Well, that's great. So one of the things that it seems to me, as I've watched TED Talks, partly because it's good training, but also just because they're so fascinating, so many of them, and I know a few people who have given them, but it seems that a more personal story with a message is really what they're looking for. Like I might want to speak about, my journey as growing up as a girl who wasn't expected to do anything, rather than get up and talk about how to be personal brand your business or something like that.
Yeah. There's a few things that people should know about TEDx. You're not up there to sell from the stage.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
not a fan of you coming in and doing an educational type talk in the form of, I'm here to promote, here to talk about what public speaking is. They want it transformed into something that is a big idea, right? Ideas worth sharing. They're
Hmm.
looking for something that's new, that's different, that's a spin on something that people are familiar with, but makes them think, right? I never thought about it that way, right? So how can you take a spin on something that you do and then not get up there and be self-gratifying about it? And then always, 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 whether it's a TEDx or in general speaking, telling stories is really important. And you're right, in TED, storytelling is even more crucial. And that's because we as humans, like I said earlier, we're connecting with other humans, and public speaking is another way to do that. And sharing stories is a great way to connect and reinforce ideas in a way that really sit with people and evoke an emotion. And so that's
Hmm.
a very important aspect of it. Yes.
Well, I love that. And I would like to ask you, since we've sort of skirted around the idea of presentations, and I follow, I learn as much as I can for free. So I follow smart people like you in areas that I want to learn about. And I follow a speaker coach who's actually in London. And one of the things that she and somebody else had talked about is the idea when you're giving a presentation that most people start with the title slide of the presentation, and they come out and they say, "Hi, I'm so happy to be here today. I'm Annette, blah, blah, blah." And I learned, which I started doing, is to start talking about my topic with slides with just images, and then go into sort of my presentation. So, first of all, what do you think of that? And second of all, what other tips do you have for people who are trying to put together presentations?
Yeah. So, to your first question there, what do I think of that method of not starting with introducing yourself? It's actually a technique that I use often as well, because you have about 30 seconds to hook your audience at the very beginning of any speech or presentation. And a great way to do that is using one of four techniques, which is a question, a startling statement, a quote, or a story. And that really grabs their attention and pulls them in. So I'll do that often and then say, hello, my name is Shannon Daniels, and today we're going to be talking about, right? But it also depends on what the format is and where you're presenting, who the audience is. So there may be occasions where you need to introduce yourself first. So it's really situational.
Hmm.
And then when you ask about some tips for preparing presentations, I will tell you, if you take nothing else away, take this one tip away. It is not about you. A presentation is never about you. We always get up there and it's like, me, 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 me. This is what I know about. This is what's important to me. Well, guess what? You forgot the most important person in the room, or people, your audience, because you're not speaking to a room full of yourself. You're speaking to a room full of other people. So, what do they care about? What are their wants, needs, and pain points? What are their values? What are their interests? What's going to resonate with them? And why should they even listen to you in the first place? So if you can put yourself in the mind of your audience and develop content that's audience centric, and then wrap in stories and weave in personal anecdotes to support that message, you're going to be winning already.
Well, I love that. And I just want to say hi to my friend Mark,
Hi,
who's
Mark.
popping by. I don't know if you know him. He is fabulous. He's been doing LinkedIn live shows forever. Hi. So thanks so much for stopping by, Mark. Um, the very first live that I was ever on was his show.
Oh, nice.
And it sort of helped me. And when I started doing my show, I kind of patterned it after his show, which is very conversational and not, Q&A in the hot seat for my guests. So that he is. I'm a fangirl. I am definitely.
Nice to have you here, Mark. And I'm glad you do the conversational approach. And that's something I teach in public speaking as well. Be conversational. You're literally having a conversation with your audience. And so if you make it more natural and conversational and less rehearsed and polished in that way so that it doesn't feel authentic, you start to lose something with that. So keep it authentic and keep it conversational. That's another way you can really connect with your audience.
Well, the last thing before I ask you sort of the last wind up question, because we're almost out of time here, is I have had people on my show who are who feel very inauthentic to me. They feel like they are just I feel like they are just on all the time, and it makes me uncomfortable, to have a guest like that. Sometimes you're talking to them and every response they give you, while they're not specifically selling, and nobody wants that. Nobody wants somebody selling on their show, on their podium or whatever. But whenever you ask them a question, their response is always something that brings it back to kind of what they do.
Mhm.
I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And it just makes the host uneasy. I'm sure it makes the audience uneasy and may make them just want to, either tune out if they're in person or keep scrolling if they're watching it, on LinkedIn or someplace like that. So
Mhm.
my final two questions for you are, what do you like best about what you do? And we've talked about a bunch of different things, but I always like to ask my guests, what is something that I haven't brought up, we haven't discussed, that you think is important that you would want to share?
Yeah, so my favorite part about what I do is getting the opportunity to help people. When someone walks through my doors and they're nervous and they're shaking and they're sweating and they're sick to their stomach, and or they can't figure out how to bring their words together, or they're trying to get on Shark Tank or the TED stage or something, whatever their goals are, being able to help them achieve those goals just gives me like the greatest. I'm getting
I see it. I see it.
it just that gives me so much meaning. So I love that, and that is my happy. And then the thing which we didn't really talk deeply on, but you started to talk about there at the end, that I have to reiterate is just be authentic. Don't speak like a politician. Don't dodge the questions. Don't be on brand and on message for exactly what you want to say and how you want to say it. You're there to serve other people when you're speaking. It's not about you. So be authentically who you are. And I'll tell a story. I When I first came out of corporate, I had worked in finance and insurance, very heavily regulated fields, and in healthcare. So I had been trained from a young age I started at 19 to be very poised and proper in the way I spoke and held myself. And even though I knew inherently that this was wrong, when I came out and became an entrepreneur, it was programmed into me. And I would go out and I would speak, and people were like, "You're a great speaker." But I wasn't landing any clients. I wasn't booking any appointments. And I couldn't figure out why. And then I said, wait a minute, you are not being yourself. Deprogramming began. So to deprogram all of that out of me and just decided, listen, I'm goofy, I'm weird, I'm awkward, I use my hands too much. That's who I am. Just get up there, be yourself, Shannon. Share your message, connect with your audience. That's what it's all about. And if I'm authentically who I am, that should work. And guess what? It worked. So authenticity is so important. Don't be who you think you should be up on that stage or the podium or the front of the room. Be who you are, because people can see through that so easily.
Well, I love that. And I think that's a great note to end on. But I do want to ask, are you open to connecting with people on LinkedIn? Where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Shannon Malkin Daniels, or you can find me on my website, speaksuccess.com. That's SPEAC success.com.
Okay. And you are open to connecting with people. So
Yes, 100%.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I will tell you, I have learned so much, and I know people watching this have learned and will be learning in the future as well. So thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who has been with us. We really appreciate you spending your time with us, and I will see you next week.
Thank you.